The wind was a thief, stealing the moisture from Alara's lips and the last of the warmth from her bones. It scoured the hardpan earth, lifting curtains of ochre dust that stung the eyes and grated between the teeth. This land was a skillet, tilted toward a merciless sun, and she was just another grain of sand being tormented upon it. Her hands, raw and bleeding, clawed at the unyielding soil. She was digging for something, a root, a tuber, any promise of life in a world that felt dead. Beside her, 3 other women did the same, their movements slow, almost dreamlike, their faces smudged with dirt and despair. All were heavy with child, their swollen bellies a cruel mockery of the barren land around them. Alara's own child felt like a stone inside her, a weight pulling her down into this unforgiving dirt. A memory, thin as smoke, coiled in her mind. The splintered wood of a wagon bed, the rumble of wheels, the jeering faces fading into the dark. Then, nothing. Just this sun, this wind, this desperate, mindless digging. Fear was a constant companion, a cold knot below her heart. It had been her shadow for days, or was it weeks? Time had lost its edges. There was only the before, a warm hearth, a husband's hand in hers, and the now, a desolate expanse with no horizon. She did not know the names of the women beside her, only the shared, hollowed look in their eyes. They were ghosts, haunting the field of a man they had never seen. A shadow fell over her. Long and sharp, it cut across the parched ground. Alara froze, her fingers still buried in the dirt. She did not look up. To look up was to give the terror a face. The other women stilled, a small herd of deer sensing the wolf. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the rasp of the wind. She could feel a presence, solid and unmoving. He will kill us, she thought, the words a cold certainty in her mind. He will see us as vermin, spoiling his crop. Though there was no crop to spoil, only dust. Finally, the shadow moved. The crunch of a heavy boot on gravel, slow, deliberate. She squeezed her eyes shut, her body trembling with a fatigue so deep it felt like a final surrender. She waited for the blow, for the harsh command, for the end of this waking nightmare. Instead, she heard a sound that was alien in its simplicity. The metallic scrape of a bucket handle, followed by the gentle slosh of water. Her eyes fluttered open. A pair of worn leather boots stood a few feet away. Her gaze traveled slowly upward, past mud-caked trousers to a frame that seemed carved from the tough, gnarled wood of the landscape itself. The man's face was all angles and planes, weathered by sun and hardship. A scar, white and jagged, cut from his temple to his jaw, pulling one side of his mouth into a permanent, unreadable line. He said nothing. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, took in the 4 of them, their pregnant forms, their torn dresses, their bloody hands. There was no pity in his expression, but there was no malice either. There was only a profound stillness, a deep and unnerving quiet. He nudged the bucket forward with his boot. The message was clear, unspoken. Water. For a long moment no one moved. Then, the woman closest, a frail girl with hair like spun straw, crawled forward on her hands and knees. She dipped her cupped hands into the bucket and drank, her sobs lost in desperate, gulping sounds. The man watched her, his face impassive. He then looked directly at Alara. His gaze held hers, and in that moment, she understood. This was not an executioner. This was something else entirely, something harder to define and perhaps more dangerous. He was offering a reprieve, not a rescue. And in this brutal, indifferent world, a single moment of reprieve was a thing of unimaginable value, a debt she had no way to repay. He led them not to his house, a small, sturdy cabin squatting low against the constant wind, but to the barn. The air inside was cool and dark, thick with the scent of hay, leather, and animal sweat. It was a cathedral of survival, and they, the penitents, huddled together on a mound of clean straw he had indicated with a curt nod. He left them there, sliding the heavy wooden door almost shut, leaving only a sliver of blinding daylight. For a day they did not see him. They only felt his presence. A pail of fresh milk appeared by the door, then a loaf of dark, heavy bread with a slab of salted butter. He moved with the silence of a hunter, his comings and goings marked only by the shifting of the light. Elara watched that sliver of light as if it were her only anchor to the world. She saw him mend a harness, his large, calloused hands working with a surprising deftness. She saw him sharpen an axe, the rhythmic scrape of stone on steel a steady, reassuring heartbeat in the vast emptiness. He did not speak to them. He did not ask how they came to be in his field, their minds scoured clean of the journey. He seemed to accept their presence as he accepted the drought or the wind, another hardship to be managed, another variable in the stark equation of living. His silence was a wall, but Elara began to see it not as a barrier to keep them out, but as a fortress he had built for himself. The other women. She was beginning to learn their names, whispered in the dark. Mary, Sarah, Anna were slowly mending. The terror in their eyes was receding, replaced by a watchful weariness. They ate the food he provided, their movements gaining strength. They spoke in fragments, piecing together a shared mosaic of trauma. A righteous sermon, accusing fingers, the shame of a husband lost to fever, or war, or simply vanished. The verdict of a town that saw their pending motherhood not as a blessing, but as a stain to be scrubbed from the community. They were outcasts, discarded. Elara listened, her own fragmented memories clicking into place. The face of the preacher, twisted in pious fury. The cold finality of her own family turning away. They had been judged, condemned, and abandoned to the wilderness, expected to perish quietly. But they had not perished. They had found this place. They had found him. One afternoon, Elara awoke from a restless sleep to find him standing just inside the barn. He held a bundle of dark cloth in his hands. He set it down on the straw, his gaze sweeping over them before landing on her. He pointed to her dress, the fabric thin and torn at the shoulder. Then he tapped the bundle. It was a dress, coarsely woven but clean and whole, and beside it a needle and thread. He turned and left without a word. Elara picked up the needle. The weight of it was familiar in her hand. She looked at the other women, their own clothes in tatters. She began to sew, her stitches small and even. It was a simple act, a domestic task from a life that felt a century away, yet it was profound. She was not just mending cloth. She was mending a part of herself. As she worked, she watched him through the crack in the door. He was breaking a wild horse in the corral, a battle of wills between man and beast. He was not cruel, but he was unyielding, his body a tense line of control and patience. The horse fought, bucking and rearing, but the man moved with it, a grim dance of dominance and respect. Finally, the animal stood, trembling but subdued, its sides heaving. He stroked its neck, his touch firm and brief, an acknowledgement of its spirit. In his quiet competence, in his stark and brutal self-sufficiency, Elara saw not a lack of feeling, but a deep, guarded control over it. He did not offer comfort because this world had no comfort to give. He offered what he had: shelter, sustenance, a needle and thread. He offered survival. And she began to understand that trust was not something to be given in words, but something to be earned in the shared silence of a world that was trying to erase them all. The sky had been a bruised purple for days, the air growing thick and heavy, pressing down on the land. A storm was coming. It was not the cleansing rain they prayed for, but a violent, angry squall, the kind that tore at roofs and turned the dust to a river of mud. The air crackled with a tension that mirrored the disquiet in Elara's own soul. She felt the baby kick, a sharp reminder of the life that depended on her, a life that would be born into this maelstrom. It was then that she saw the wagon. It appeared as a dark speck on the horizon, crawling slowly toward them, stirring the dust in its wake. It was not a farmer's cart. It was black, severe, and pulled by two matching horses. Her breath caught in her throat. Mary, who had been sitting by the door, let out a small, strangled gasp and scrambled back into the shadows of the barn. Silas, who had been reinforcing the corral fence, straightened slowly. He did not turn to look at them. He simply watched the wagon's approach, his body becoming utterly still, a rock against which the coming tide would break. The wagon stopped yards from the house. A man climbed down, his long black coat immaculate despite the dust. He was tall and gaunt, his face a mask of pinched piety. Preacher Blackwood, the man who had condemned them, the architect of their exile. Alara's blood ran cold. He had come to finish what he started, to ensure their ghosts would not trouble the righteous sleep of his town. Another man, burly and carrying a heavy walking stick, remained in the wagon seat, his eyes scanning the property. Blackwood strode toward Silas, his boots crunching with an arrogant authority. "This is your land, I presume?" he asked, his voice oily and loud, meant to carry. Silas merely nodded, his hands resting on the top rail of the fence. He had not moved an inch. "I am searching for property that has gone astray," Blackwood continued, a cruel smile touching his lips. "For fallen women, burdens on a decent community. We sent them out to God's judgment. It seems they have trespassed upon yours instead." He peered past Silas, his eyes fixing on the barn door, as if he could sense their cowering presence within. "They are sinners. Harboring them is an invitation for Providence to frown upon this homestead." Silas remained silent, his stormy eyes locked on the preacher. The wind whipped a strand of hair across his scarred face. His quiet was more unnerving than any shout, a deep well of resolve that the preacher's torrent of words could not fill. "They are to be returned to the wilderness," Blackwood declared, his voice rising. "It is God's will." Finally, Silas spoke. His voice was low, rough, like stone grinding against stone. "This is my land," that was all. 3 words, but they held the weight of the endless sky, the hardness of the baked earth. They were a declaration, not an argument. Blackwood's sneer faltered. He had come expecting a simple farmer, easily cowed by scripture and intimidation. He found something else. He found a man who had drawn a line in the dust, a line the preacher was not prepared to cross. "You would defy the will of a community, of God himself, for a collection of harlots?" He spat. Silas's gaze did not waver. "Their judgment is not yours to make." "Not here." He took a deliberate step away from the fence, positioning himself squarely between the preacher and the barn. It was a silent, absolute challenge. The man in the wagon shifted uneasily. Blackwood's face flushed with fury, his mask of righteousness slipping to reveal the raw, petty tyrant beneath. He looked from Silas's unyielding form to the darkening sky, which was now grumbling with the first hint of thunder. He was a man of words, of pulpit pounding and fear-mongering. He had no weapon against this kind of silent, immovable strength. From the crack in the barn door, Alara watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. But the fear was different now. It was no longer the paralyzing terror of a victim. It was sharp, fierce, and mingled with a surge of something she had not felt in months. A wild, protective defiance. She was not just watching a man defend his property. She was watching him defend them. Defeated, Preacher Blackwood uttered a final, impotent curse upon the house and the land before climbing back into his wagon. He departed as he had come, a specter of malice swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape. The moment the wagon disappeared, the heavens broke. Rain fell not in drops but in solid gray sheets, turning the world outside the barn into a churning chaos of water and wind. The thunder was a physical blow, shaking the very timbers of their shelter. Yet inside, a profound calm had settled. The external storm was a release, washing away the tension of the preacher's visit, cleansing the air of his poison. The threat had come and it had been met. It had been turned away by the quiet resolve of one man. For the rest of the day and through the night, they listened to the storm rage. Silas did not come to the barn. They knew he would be occupied securing his cabin, tending to his world. But his presence lingered, a shield they could feel even in his absence. The next morning, the world was reborn. The air was cool and clean, smelling of wet earth and sage. A fragile sun broke through the clouds, painting the damp ground in hues of silver and gold. Alara pushed the heavy barn door open and stepped outside. The land that had seemed so hostile was now softened, renewed. She saw Silas by the edge of the field where he had first found them. He was examining the soil, crumbling a dark, wet clod between his fingers. He looked up as she approached, his expression as unreadable as ever. She stopped a few feet from him, the silence between them no longer a void of fear, but a space of shared understanding. There were no words for what she felt. Gratitude was too small a word, and relief too simple. It was a recognition, a deep and quiet acknowledgement of the stand he had taken. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried clearly in the clean morning air. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. His gaze dropped from her face to the gentle swell of her belly, then back to her eyes. In that look, a silent transaction passed. He was no longer just their keeper, and she was no longer just a refugee. A fragile partnership had been forged in the crucible of hardship and defiance. He held out his hand, palm up. In it were several small, dark seeds. He looked from the seeds to the damp, welcoming earth at their feet. The narrative of their lives had been one of loss, of being uprooted and cast away. But here, in this field, a different story was about to be written. Alara reached out and took the seeds from his hand. Her fingers brushed against his rough palm, a fleeting touch that held more meaning than 1,000 spoken words. Behind her, the other women emerged from the barn, drawn by the sunlight and the quiet. They were no longer four disparate, broken souls. They were a strange and resilient constellation, a family born not of blood, but of shared survival and a common, unexpected haven. Alara knelt, her knees sinking into the soft mud. She pressed a seed into the earth, the very earth she had once clawed at in desperation. Now she was not taking but giving. She was not digging for an end, but planting a beginning. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the life within. The future was still a vast, unwritten territory, but for the first time since her world had shattered, it was not a landscape of fear. It was a field of possibility, waiting for them to sow it with hope.